on Jerusalem Dateline. This week on Jerusalem Dateline, CBN's David Brody interviews U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
We've always thought that the Western Wall was part of Israel.
Plus, President Trump decides not to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem for now, and how the Six-Day War opened up the biblical heartland.
It says in the book of Ezekiel, the dry bones being put back together again.
All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from the heart of Jerusalem with American and Israeli flags flying in anticipation of the visit of U.S. President Donald Trump. Well, 60 American Christian leaders signed a letter advising Trump to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But a White House spokesperson told Reuters that at least for now, President Trump has decided to delay the move in order not to complicate the restart of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Here's a look at the situation and the history of the U.S. diplomatic presence in the Holy Land. It was a campaign promise candidate Donald Trump stated over and over.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
But President Trump won't fulfill that promise when he visits Israel. It's the latest chapter in America's long diplomatic history in the Holy Land. This is where the first U.S. consulate stood in 1844, just inside the walls of the old city near the Jaffa Gate. Now it's used as the Christian Information Center. In 1912, it moved just a few blocks away to a place called Prophet Street. Then it moved to this location where the U.S. representative to the Palestinian Authority now sits. This consulate reports directly to the State Department rather than the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv. About a 10-minute drive away stands a U.S. government building that provides consular services for U.S. citizens. All of this while the embassy sits in Tel Aviv. After the White House announcement not to move the embassy now, the question remains, will it ever relocate to Jerusalem?
We actually met with Senator John Kyle up on Capitol Hill one day, and we gauged that he was serious and that moving the embassy was an issue that he wanted to do on principle. It wasn't politics, it was principle, and he asked us to draft a bill.
More than 20 years ago, David Parsons of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, the ICEJ, helped draft the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act.
As the bill went through the sausage grinder of Congress, it changed. They added this presidential waiver authority, which it was intended to gut the bill. It said every 6 months the president can suspend this bill if he certifies it's in U.S. national security interest. It's fear that has kept us out.
For more than 20 years, successive presidents have signed that waiver, and the current one expires June 1st. In addition to national security, another reason given for invoking the waiver is that the U.S. is supposed to be an honest broker. How would you address the concern or criticism that some people would have? If you do this, you're going to undermine the quote-unquote peace process, and you'll be undermining this ability to have a negotiated deal.
I think that at least putting our embassy in West Jerusalem would actually strengthen the peace process. And I think the longer that the nations wait to do this, the bigger and bigger the question of Jerusalem becomes.
Parsons says Jerusalem seems to be on a 50-year cycle of favor.
When you look at, not only the last 50 years when the city was reunified in 1967, in 100 years ago when Allenby, the British general, marched into the city, liberated from the Ottoman Turks, just as the British government was committing to build a Jewish state here. Even 150 years ago, 1867, General Warren discovered the old city, the original city of David, south of the Temple Mount. And each of these things, every 50 years, something happening in Jerusalem to really free it and release it into its prophetic purposes.
Israeli leaders hope that one day it includes relocating the embassy.
Israel reunited Jerusalem 50 years ago in 1967, but the connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem, spiritually, goes back 2,000 years. Our claim, our presence in Jerusalem has been here for decades. Jews have been streaming back to their ancient capital for years. And the movement of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is an American recognition of the special ties of Jerusalem to the Jewish people. It may be symbolic, but it goes to the core of the identity of Israel.
I think the U.S. moving the embassy to Jerusalem is the right thing to do. It's way overdue. And, of course, it would be a blessing to the U.S.
In 1950, Israel declared Jerusalem as its capital. In 1967, it captured the Old City and the eastern part of Jerusalem. Then, in 1980, Israel passed the Basic Law Jerusalem that incorporated all of the land captured in 1967 as its capital. That's when most embassies left Jerusalem for Tel Aviv, and the ICEJ moved in.
To represent Christians from all over the world who want to stand in solidarity with Israel, help secure it, and help it reach its destiny, and also want to stand in solidarity with their claim and connection to Jerusalem.
And whether or not the U.S. Embassy eventually moves to Jerusalem, Parsons sees a glorious future for the city.
This is where that promised son of David, the Messiah, will rule and reign over a world in peace and righteousness. And of course, we're Christians. We believe that's Jesus. But I think a house of prayer for all people, that exalted throne of the Messiah during the Messianic age, this is Israel's ultimate destiny.
On the eve of President Trump's visit to the Middle East, there's a sharp drop in the number of Jewish Israelis who believe the president is pro-Israel. Before he took office, nearly 80% of those surveyed believe Trump supports Israel. That number has dropped to 56% in the Smith poll taken for the Jerusalem Post. During the time between surveys, the president has welcomed Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas to the White House. He's also suggested that Israel stop building in biblical Judea and Samaria, and announced he won't move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, at least for now. One voice in the administration getting high marks for defending Israel is the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. CBN's David Brody sat down with Haley and discussed issues like moving the U.S. Embassy and whether or not the Western Wall is part of Israel.
That was a promise, if you will, that he did say on the campaign trail that he wanted to do it. Now, maybe his heart does, but there's politics involved, too, here, and a lot more than that. So,
right. You know, I mean, obviously, I believe that, you know, the capital should be Jerusalem and the embassy should be moved to Jerusalem, because if you look at all of their government is in Jerusalem. So much of what goes on is in Jerusalem. And I think that we have to, you know, see that for what it is. I think the tricky part is where the Palestinians come in on this and where the Israelis come in on this. We know the Israelis don't want to give on Jerusalem at all, and we have to see how strong the Palestinians stand on that. But I think that's your touchy part, is Jerusalem even on the table? I don't know that it is. And, you know, we may stop just with that talking point, but we'll have to wait and see. You know, I don't know what the policy of the administration is, but I believe the Western Wall is part of Israel. And I think that that's how, you know, we've always seen it, and that's how we should pursue it. I'm not real sure what happened with that issue, but I know that they're trying to fix that and get that taken care of. But, you know, we've always thought that the Western Wall was part of Israel.
Up next, hear the sights and sounds of prophecy in action.
It says that the sounds of children playing in the streets will be heard once again. So you hear it, you see it.
Israel and the world are wondering what kind of peace plan President Trump has in mind. Previous plans including Israel turning over land gained in the 1967 Six-Day War in exchange for peace. That's unacceptable to those who believe God gave it to the Jewish people as part of their divine inheritance. We went to Israel's biblical heartland to find out why. Much of the world calls the playgrounds these children enjoy an obstacle to peace. That's because they're in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. Are we witnessing prophecy unfolding right now after the 1967 war?
Absolutely. It says that the sounds of children playing in the streets will be heard once again. So you hear it, you see it.
I spoke with former Shiloh Mayor David Rubin in Shiloh, overlooking the road of the patriarchs, the highway Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would have traveled on. Rubin told me the Six-Day War was pivotal in Israel's history. It opened the door for Jewish people to redeem the biblical heartland after 2,000 years in exile. Places like Jerusalem, home of 2 consecutive Jewish temples. Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. Hebron, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives are buried. And Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood for 369 years. They all came back into Israeli hands.
So you see 67, the Six-Day War, just like a pivot, a prophetic pivot in time and history?
Oh, clearly, clearly. It says in the book of Ezekiel, the dry bones being put back together again. Israel was being put back together again as a nation. If we don't have a right to Shiloh, and we don't have a right to Shechem, and we don't have a right to Bethel and Jericho, we definitely don't have a right to Tel Aviv.
But not everyone saw the opportunity. It took until 1978 for Shiloh to be established, just above the site where the tabernacle had rested.
There were Israelis who were coming here trying to set up tents on the lower hills of Shiloh, and the Israeli prime minister, who was looking over his shoulder at the American president, kept sending in the army to chase them away.
Just months after the Six-Day War, Israelis established the first Jewish community in Judea, about 35 miles south of Shiloh at Kfar Etzion. Jews lived there before Israel's independence war in 1948 and were either evacuated or massacred by the Jordanians.
When this group of orphans of those who were murdered notified the Israeli government that if you don't give us the permit, we will go on without a permit. The government really couldn't stand up against orphans of those who were murdered. And so Kfar Etzion was established.
Rabbi Eliezer Waldman was one of those who helped establish the next community in ancient Hebron.
There was always a Jewish community in Hebron, even during the 2,000 years of exile, until 1929, when the Arabs massacred the Jewish community here.
A small group of families rented a hotel in Hebron for the Passover Seder. Essentially, they never left.
And I believe then almost the entire population of Israel was with us. Even more than a half a year after the Six-Day War, the spirits were high among almost the entire population.
Thousands of Israeli pilgrims enter the old city of Jerusalem for solemn religious ceremonies.
All of the media was with us. Yeah, I even remember headlines, passages of the prophets hovering in the air.
After 50 years, some 430,000 Israelis live in more than 200 communities in Judea and Samaria. The number jumps to 750,000 if Eastern Jerusalem neighborhoods are included.
The growth here has been so tremendous, and as we've gotten through those 50 years after the Six-Day War and we're looking to the future, so we have this vision of a booming Shiloh once again.
50 years ago, what would this place have looked like?
Barren desert. There was nothing. It was just hills of weeds and thorns.
This road will lead to a new school for the growing population. There are 8,000 residents in the Shiloh Township. More than 2,000 of them are children who study here in Shiloh.
We learned that when Israel is not in the land, that the land lays barren. The land doesn't give its fruit. And now the land of Israel is giving of its fruit because Israel is back. And the most important fruit is what you see right here. All of these children here.
Coming up, see how the 1967 Six-Day War changed the geopolitics of the Middle East.
Suddenly, this little scrappy Israel was seen as an outpost of Western democracy.
In the 50 years since the Six-Day War, the world has seen the Iron Curtain fall and global terrorism rise. But through it all, one alliance has thrived, the United States and Israel. And as John Waggy explains, although this bond has been tested, it's grown stronger.
After the tension of the Obama years, Donald Trump's election opened a new chapter in U.S. relations with Israel. From the campaign through his inauguration, Trump sounded a clarion call to restore U.S. support for Israel, although he's made many supporters in the U.S. and Israel nervous with his recent backing of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The foundation of the U.S.-Israel alliance began in the Six-Day War. After Israel took back its biblical heartland, including Jerusalem in 1967, the whole world took notice. Israel's friends and millions of Americans rejoiced, but Israel's enemies began to call the U.S. the big Satan and Israel the little Satan.
When Israel won the Six-Day War, it was huge, because you went from anticipating disaster. It wasn't that long after the Holocaust, and perhaps another massacre of the Jewish people, to an incredible victory.
Ambassador Dory Gold is the former director of Israel's foreign ministry.
I remind you, in global terms, the U.S. had been bogged down in Vietnam, trying to contain the spread of Soviet power in the Far East. And here, all of a sudden, Israel stands firm and not only defeats its Arab neighbors, but defeats clients of the Soviet Union who were using Soviet weaponry. So it was a victory for Israel, it was the survival of the Jewish people, and it was an enormous victory for the West.
Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg says Israel's defeat of the Soviet proxies woke up the White House under President Lyndon Johnson.
Suddenly, this little scrappy Israel was seen as an outpost, a frontal forward position of Western democracy that had the capacity to defeat Soviet MiGs, Soviet tanks, Soviet tactics, Soviet-trained soldiers. So suddenly, the United States thought, maybe Israel's more important than we thought geopolitically. And it was quite galvanizing to what became the most important alliance in the history of the 20th century, the alliance between the United States and Israel.
President Johnson told the Russians no when they called for Israel to give up all of the territory recaptured in the war. Johnson made clear that Israel would have secure and recognized boundaries, a policy expanded by Presidents Reagan and Bush.
And that became the basis of American diplomacy for decades. And only recently some people talk about a full Israeli withdrawal. That would be contrary to Israel's national security today, and it certainly was contrary to Israel's national security back then.
In the half-century since the war, Israel has become a military power, as threats around it have also grown. Iran pursues nuclear ambitions while calling for Israel's destruction. Its terror arm in Lebanon, Hezbollah, has more than 100,000 missiles poised on Israel's north. And the old bear, Russia, is back in the region, looking for a foothold. Gold warns Iran's ties to nuclear North Korea and the Mexican drug cartels put the threat on the U.S. doorstep.
The entire Iranian ballistic missile program, to a large extent, is connected with North Korea's ballistic missile program. Both of us have an interest in making sure that the proliferation of ballistic missiles to rogue states be stopped.
As Europe becomes more Muslim, the whole idea of Western civilization is shifting. Rosenberg believes the changes could mean more fulfillment of Bible prophecy in the Middle East.
One of the worst-case scenarios for Israel is if Russia and/or Iran end up controlling what's left of Syria as it continues to implode. If it's Iran, you'll have an apocalyptic, genocidal Shia theocracy just over the border. If the Russians ask the Iranians to leave, you still have Russia, a nuclear-armed power, right on Israel's border. And according to Bible prophecy, particularly Ezekiel 38 and 39, we know Russia and Iran will form an alliance together against Israel and will come against Israel from the north in the end times. I'm not saying we're there yet, but the trend lines continue to be consistent with the preparation for those Gog and Magog prophecies.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, a look at CBN's new docudrama, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. To commemorate the Six-Day War and the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, CBN has produced a new docudrama called In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem.
The time has come to begin a battle of annihilation.
Our goal is clear. to wipe Israel off the map.
We shall destroy Israel and its inhabitants.
I just started this job 10 months ago. Now you want me to plan an entire war in 2 days?
Yes. Take the old city and be done with it.
We should go in now.
And what is your great strategy for that?
To be right here, Mota, and not to go in. History will never forgive you.
Jerusalem has never been conquered from the east. Not since King David's time.
So it will be the second time. And the last one.
Enter the old city immediately and capture it.
55th Paratrooper Brigade, move toward the Lion's Gate. It was a merciless battle, but you didn't complain. For you, it was enough to drive forward and to conquer. Jerusalem is yours, forever.
Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us throughout the week on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.